Jesus, come to me, soothe my soul with rays of peace, as I look to you alone, fill me with your love. Mountains high or valleys low, you will never let me go. By your fountain let me drink, fill my thirsty soul. Glorious, marvelous grace that rescued me. Holy, worthy is the Lamb who died for me. Blessed Jesus, come to me as I fall down at your feet. Let me touch your nail-scarred hands, Jesus, I would see. Glorious, marvelous grace that rescued me. Holy, worthy is the Lamb who died for me. Glorious, marvelous grace that rescued me. Holy, worthy is the Lamb who died for me. Worthy of glory, worthy of honor, worthy of praise is he. Worthy of glory, worthy of honor, worthy of praise is he. He has redeemed me by the blood of the Lamb, and he has set my spirit free. Worthy of glory, worthy of honor, worthy of praise is he. Worthy of glory, worthy of honor, worthy of praise is he. Worthy of glory, worthy of honor, worthy of praise is he. He has redeemed me by the blood of the Lamb, and he has set my spirit free. Worthy of glory, worthy of honor, worthy of praise, worthy of praise, worthy of praise is he. In remembrance of me, eat this bread. In remembrance of me, drink this wine. In remembrance of me, pray for the time when God's own will is done. In remembrance of me, help the sick. In remembrance of me, feed the poor. In remembrance of me, open the door, and let your brother in. Let him in. Take heed and be comforted. Drink and remember too, that this is my body and precious blood shed for you, shed for you. In remembrance of me, search for truth. In remembrance rescues me, and when the lion comes, he is my victory, constantly watching over me. He is constantly watching over me. We are his children, and he is our Father, watching over our soul. Great is his love for his sons and his daughters, watching wherever we go. And when the winds blow, he is my shelter, and when I'm lost and alone, he rescues me. And when the lion comes, he is my victory, constantly watching over me. He is constantly watching over me. Lord, from your hand I take the bread, and from your cup I drink the wine. You serve forgiveness for my need. You serve your holy life for mine. Now from your lips I hear the words, this is my body and my blood. I see the mercy in your eyes. I see the pain. I see the love. I see the cross. I see your face. My God, what agony and grief. I see you suffer as you die. I hear you pray. It is for me. Oh, Jesus, Savior, Holy God, I live and breathe in your embrace. Lord, every moment draw my heart to love and serve you face to face. Rejoice for the steps, oh yes, of a righteous man. They are ordered of God. They are ordered of God. Rejoice for the steps, oh yes, of a righteous man. They are ordered of God. Rejoice for the steps, oh yes, of a righteous man. They are ordered of God. They are ordered of God. Rejoice for the steps, oh yes, of a righteous man. They are ordered of God. In the time of trouble, God will uphold him. God will preserve
And we are happy you're here. We have more and more of our regulars coming back out. We're glad to see all of you making your appearances. Some of you haven't seen much in the last year, and are glad you're back and able to be out. Couple of notes on our prayer list. Margie is doing some better. She had a couple of tests today and a doctor's visit, whatever, and a doctor's visit yesterday. But she said she wanted to eat out tonight, so we got a call and did something we hadn't done in a year, get to eat with Margie, out with Margie. So that was a good moment of progress, so we're thankful for that. Remember Helen Odell and Mitzi Webb, both of them still in hospice. Felix's mom and dad, brother and sister Cruz, are still here, and I think they're going home maybe next weekend and be for a couple of weeks, then come back and finish her chemo up. Good. So Lanny York got to come home today. He was next on the list down here. Judy Relaford had her nuclear stress test today, and I talked to her. She said it wasn't too bad. She said it wasn't as bad as she thought. Of course, you don't know anything. You got to find out go back and see the doctor to find out what it is. Jamie goes in the morning at 9:30 to have hers done, and so I guess that was the Trenton Church of Christ test of the month. This month was stress test. The senior saint building here at 2:00 in our own vehicles. You can ride with somebody if you want to. But we're not going to take the bus, but you can ride with someone. We're going to the Cattleman Stampede in Fort Payne. The menu's on the board out there if you want to look. We will be there in time. Don, you'll be happy to know the $6 meal includes your tea. You'll be there for that, won't you? You'll be right on that, won't you? Be looking for it. But we're going to do that, and it's just going to be good to get back together. If you will sign up, I need to call them, give them a count tomorrow. So if you're going to go, if you're going to go, you can do. They need to have a very the egg hunt on the 27th. I've got Andy's going to lead singing tonight. Tyler's has our devotional at the appropriate time. By the way, Adeline is not high fashion. She only got 1 foot in a boot, but she did get, has a high ankle sprain, a grade 3, grade 4, 3/4, 3.5 sprain, and it's like hopping around tonight. Glad she's able to be out. She'll be out for about 4 weeks.
694. First and last. First and last. To Canaan's land I'm on.
Well, since you're at the place, I'll be here today. Still gather more of your word. And we thank you. And please be with those who have been mentioned here tonight, Father. And we thank you for your Son, Jesus Christ, like the cross for our sins. And in his name we pray. Amen.
Good day, everyone. Are you familiar with the term Ides of March? It's a term made familiar by William Shakespeare, a play he wrote about Julius Caesar. And in the play, supposed soothsayer tells Julius Caesar to beware the Ides of March. Now, in the play, of course, he doesn't beware the Ides of March, and he does go on and gets killed by his best friend. But the Ides of March actually is simply the days in the middle of March, which is March 15th, So that's coming right up on us. But in the Roman calendar, March was the first month of the year, so this was kind of like their new year. So the March being the first month, it was a time of the religious and social practices of the time. It was a day of reckoning to observe paying off your debts. So basically, it was kind of like starting anew. A pretty good concept. Pay off all your debts and start off anew. But so I wanted us to look at our debts. Just take a few points and look at our debts. And I wanted to start off with what we call the model prayer. Some people call the Lord's Prayer. And you've probably noticed this before, but and I imagine most of us could repeat this. Matthew 6, verses 9 through 13. Pray then in this way, Our Father who is in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts, as we also forgive our debtors. So in Jesus' prayer, he's teaching us to pray. We're asking to be forgiven by the way that we forgive others. That's a pretty heavy statement to think about. You know, when we start talking about forgiveness, we a lot of times go to the story that Jesus told about the servant that owed 10,000 talents to his master, and the master calls him forward, and the servant begs for his forgiveness, and the master feels compassion on him and forgives him his debt. And that part of the story so far is really nice. But then what happens? We know the other part of the story is the servant that's been forgiven the debt goes out and finds those that are indebted to him and tries to throw them in jail to collect from them. And that goes right along with what Jesus taught. After he taught the model prayer, he said, "For if you forgive others for their offenses, your heavenly Father will forgive you. But if you do not forgive others, then your Father will not forgive you of your offenses." So the first thing we want to think about when we're forgiving debts is if we want our own debts to be forgiven, we need to forgive others. Paul also writes about who do we owe? Who do we owe? In Romans 13, 7 and 8, he writes, "Pay to all what is due them, taxes to those whom taxes is due, custom to whom custom, respect to whom respect, honor to whom honor. Owe nothing to anyone except love one another. For the ones who love his neighbor has fulfilled the law." So that's our debt to each other. So we give the respect, we pay our taxes, but most of all, we want to love one another. And then we want to look at our debt to Christ, or our debt to God. And we know in Romans 3:23, we read about all of sin comes short of the glory of God. 3 chapters later, again in verse 23, it says, "For the wages of sin and death." So we have a heavy debt. There's a story that's told, don't know if any truth in it or not, but it's another story from the Roman times. It's a Roman nobleman died, leaving an enormous debt. And somehow, through his life, he was able to conceal the fact that he had this enormous debt. But when he died, it was found out, and so he had, his estate was sold at auction. Everything was going to be sold. Well, it's said that Caesar Augustus instructed his agent to go buy the man's pillow. And then, of course, that was kind of confusing to the agent, but Caesar explains that anybody that could have that kind of debt and be able to sleep, so to illustrate that's our debt. That's our debt to Christ. It should be one that bothers our conscience, the ones that keeps us awake. And as we know, fortunately, that debt's been paid for. What Christ paid in Mark 10:45 says, "For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." And what we got from that is talked about in Romans 22, Romans 6:22. A benefit resulting in sanctification and the outcome, eternal life. Some religions, like Hinduism, teach that to pay your debts, you got to be reincarnated, suffer, come back, your debt to karma. Islam kind of teaches that your good deeds have to outweigh your bad deeds. But Christianity, our Christ, he paid our debt for us, and that's what we want to hold on to. So this month, I want to encourage you not to beware the Ides of March, but to embrace them. Embrace the Ides of March. Make sure your debt is paid. And at this time, if you have anything that's on your mind or you'd like to come and have us pray for you or be baptized, we're going to open the invitation as we stand and sing.
Twenty-three. First and last. All things are ready. Come to the feast. Come, for the table now is spread.
Couple things I neglected to announce before our people are dismissed. One is Phyllis called me this afternoon. She was fine. They got through their COVID testing and quarantine and all that. But she said she had a bug this afternoon. Wasn't feeling very good. That's where they are. And if you weren't here Sunday, you know that Lena obeys the gospel Sunday. So if you didn't get a chance to speak to her and see her, make sure you do that tonight. This time our teachers can be dismissed to their class. And parents, don't forget Mighty Mite and youth group. Remember, as soon as class is over, Matt's got a few things to go over with you and Sydney about some things about getting ready for the egg hunt. But you meet real quick tonight, that'll be good on that. Verse for song, and then we'll be dismissed. Your class.
8:47. Bind us together, Lord, bind us together with cords that cannot be broken. Bind us together, Lord, bind us together, Lord, bind us together with love. There is only one God. There is only
All right, if you got your Bibles, you want to turn to Judges chapter 8. Judges chapter 8. By the way, next week, one of the real good chapters is on Abimelech and the dirty little traitor that he was and conspirator he was. And I'm going to visit my mother. She has decided that at 88, she probably needs to go to Hawaii again for a month. So she's going to Hawaii with my niece for a month. So I'm going to go try to see her before she gets away, because she said, I may stay a month and I may stay a little longer. I don't know. So all the difficulties of growing old, you know, you have to go to Hawaii for a month and just tough stuff. But she's getting to go, and my nephew-in-law wants to get her out there, so she is getting to do that. And I'm thankful for it. Not even, well, I am a little jealous, but anyway. If you remember last week, we introduced Gideon, and or really 2 weeks ago, we introduced Gideon. And now we're going to get into seeing Gideon. Make sure my phone's turned off where it doesn't, and it already ringing. There we are. Gideon, of course, is a very well-known judge, and last week probably the most known part of him, when he goes out and with 300 men conquers an army of, we're going to learn 120,000, 135,000, but 120,000 were slain in that immediate battle there. So now, as you see happen so often in the Bible, and most of you, I can tell you've lived a week or two, guess what happens a lot of times in our lives? Right after something really good, what's the old expression? No good deed goes unpunished. Yeah, it's kind of like everything's going great. Man, Gideon has come out. He showed his faith in God. He's just turned around and, I mean, just wiped out this army that outnumbered him 10-1 or more than that, more like 100-1. And he goes out and everything's going great. And now he comes back in, and the most, at this time, probably the strongest tribe, the most powerful tribe, and certainly the most influential tribe, because that's where the tabernacle was at Shiloh, and Bethel, and between Bethel and Shiloh, probably at this time. And Ephraim, he goes into Ephraim and he says to them, last week, you remember, he let them execute the two leading generals. And now he comes into them, and guess what happens? You got to be thinking, man, I'm a pretty successful guy. I've been, with God's help, this has gone really good. Everything's going along, cruising along, looking really good. And all of a sudden, the Ephraimites, that very strong, very traditionally strong family, they come in and they said to him, why have you done this to us? Why did you treat us like this? Why didn't you call us when you went to fight the Ephraimites? Now, they've already have been in part of the battle, but they weren't called at the very beginning for whatever reason. The Bible doesn't disclose it. But these Ephraimites are really upset, and it says, different versions say they reprimanded Gideon sharply. Their conflict was strong. There are a lot of different terms. The bottom line, you don't have to really need a Hebrew lexicon to understand they were not getting along. This is not a happy time. Here this guy's had this great victory, and now somebody's coming in just trying to slap him in the face. But you're going to see something here, folks, that is a great lesson for us. Here he is, and these people who wrongly, quite frankly, they look prideful to me, and they look conceited, is sort of my personal spin on the way they are. Instead of saying, hey, we can all be happy about this great victory, they're going, why didn't you let us get in the fight? So Ephraim says to them a very, very interesting thing as he goes along, and he says to them, what you've done basically is what he said. What you did was a lot better than what we did. I mean, look at what you did. And then he says, is the gleaning of the grapes of Ephraim, isn't that better than the vintage of Abiezer? Well, Abiezer was his hometown, where he was from, his community, his people. And then he says in verse 3, God delivered into your hands the princes of Midian, Oreb and Zeeb. And what was I able to do in comparison to you? Now, let's think for just a minute. You and I think realistically for a minute. Here you've got a man that with God's help took an army of 300 and wiped out an army of 120,000. Pretty good deal. These two princes get captured, and he hands them over to the Ephraimites and says, kill these guys. No, they're in handcuffs or shackles or whatever they were in, bound up. They bring them in, and so they get to kill these two princes, generals, whatever the correct term was. There's a lot of disagreement about what their title was. But then he comes back, and instead of saying, guys, y'all ought to shut up and listen to me. Look at what I did. Look at what, with God's help, look what I did. But instead he says, what you people did was so great. What you did was so much better than what I did. Now, here's where, and this is why I think there's a lot of pride involved by Ephraim. Because what happened as soon as he said that? Well, the King James says, their anger subsided toward him when he said that. Now, many times, there are people who get their dander up, they get all in a hissy fit, and they're melting down about something that they felt like something happened at church that they didn't really get recognized for, as what they did was so important. I mean, do you not understand that the other week there was no cards in the rack, and I went out and I found some cards in the back, and I put the cards in the rack there. And I don't care what you did. It doesn't matter that you've been helping influence your daughter to come to Christ. You've been working with trying to encourage people to come back. You've been doing all these things. But you get somebody that's all mad, and sometimes in some congregations, they're kind of people of influence. And they come in and say, why didn't you let me do that? I'd have been happy to have done that. When most of the time, probably, if you're carrying this to a 21st century church situation, probably the same people are saying, why didn't you let us come fight the Ephraimites? Guess what had been happening to them? Somebody had asked them before, why don't you go with us to fight the Ephraimites? No, we don't think we will. But then when it's all done, the battle's won. Why didn't you do that? It reminds me of a story. My first acting job I had in the second grade. I know I was an actor. I've got a neighbor that's an actor. I was an actor. I was in the school play, and I was the little red hen. Yeah, I had a cute yellow costume, a little comb, a little thing up on top, and little tail feathers and everything. And guess what my job was to do? Go around and ask everybody, would you help me plant the wheat? Well, no, I'm not going to help you plant. Would you help me plow the field? No, I'm not going to help you plow the field. Would you help me? And you go down, it's been more years than I can remember since I did that, but I don't remember all the lines. But bottom line was, I had to ask everybody about helping, because everybody in the village, all the animals, the barnyard animals, all wanted to eat bread. But guess what you have to do to eat bread? You have to plant the seed, you have to plow it, you have to weed it, you have to fertilize, you have to water it, you have to do all that, and you have to harvest it, you have to bake the bread. Nobody wanted to do that. But then when it came time, and I walk out with a loaf of bread, and I mean, we were like a progressive theater group. Because I think somebody was supposed to make a loaf of bread, where it looked like a homemade loaf of bread. They forgot it. So one of the teachers, I think, went to the Weigel's 7-Eleven and came back and had like a loaf of Wonder Bread or something, walking out holding that. Now, everybody wants to eat the Wonder Bread now. Everybody wants to eat the bread now. Well, I kind of get the idea. That's kind of where Ephraim was. They wanted all the glory now, but they did not had not had to be involved in it. Now, maybe I'm wrong with that. That's my opinion. But what really means is they were so proud. We're the most important tribe. We're the most powerful tribe. And you didn't even, and basically the undercurrent is, I can't believe you did it without us. How could you win without us? I mean, do you not realize how far back we go? How important we are? And now you're doing all this. So they come up in it, and another thing that probably was an angle in it. You're going to see it at the end of Gideon's story, toward the end of Gideon's story. Guess what happened whenever you killed people in an army? Guess what you did the next day out on the battlefield? You took the spoils. You took everything. The Amalekites, the Ishmaelites, they're also going to be known as. One of the things they did, they wore gold earrings. We're going to find out more about that. So not only was their pride at stake, but the bounty was at stake too. All the money. Why didn't you let us get in on this thing and do this? So he does a great thing and just says, look, anybody could have done what we did. I mean, for 300 of us to go out and kill 120,000, anybody could have done that. But not anybody could have executed these two guys like you did. I mean, you killed two of the most powerful generals, princes they did. Look how good what you did was compared to what we did. Now, translating into church today, of course, we never have that problem here at Trenton. But if we do ever, if it ever happens and comes up, or if you've ever been in a situation where it happened, guess what sometimes you got to do? You got to, when you see somebody, now who was in the wrong in this story? The Ephraimites. They weren't in the wrong the way they approached this thing. But what does Gideon, does he care about who's right or who's wrong, or does he care about repairing the relationship? He wants to fix the relationship, doesn't he? Now, so many times in our relationships in church, in our relationships in our family, in our relationships with our friends, it becomes more about being right and me proving to you that I'm right than it does in saying, let's bring the relationship back together. So you see here, and that's where Gideon starts off at, and he does that. You see some real diplomacy there. And then in verse 4 now, you remember, Gideon's won a great battle against all odds. 300 to 120,000. Really 135,000, but 120,000 of them died in the battle, in the following chase. So he's had this great victory. He ought to be really happy, and he ought to be a hero. I mean, these 300 men are heroes to the tribes. They ought to be. They've done great things. They come down, and verse 4 now, they go through these towns. You can see it's the next one, I'm sorry. It's next, it's got the map on it. But they're coming down, and they're up there in Gad. This is Trans-Jordan. Give you another little learning turn. Try to give a little bit every time. Remember, if you want to get wet, which way do you go? West. Get wet, you go west. So going away from the Mediterranean there, you're going east. And they crossed over the Jordan River into what's called Trans-Jordan, the other side of Jordan. They get over here, and there's two towns that they're coming down in the battle coming from. and they come through Succoth and Penuel. And when they get to Succoth, now his tribe, they've been up more about over here, and they've been chasing these guys, this army, and stopping to slaughter them every time they catch them. They're hungry, they're tired, they come down. He comes into a village of Succoth in the tribe of Gad, and he says, look, can you give us some bread? Can you feed my people a little? Give us something to eat. These guys, these 300 guys, we've been chasing this army, the Midianites, and we're really hungry. And Succoth then sort of asked a question, a hyperbole, I suppose. They said, are the hands of Zebah and Zalmunna now in your hand that we should give bread to your army? In other words, do we know you're going to win? I mean, what if we back the losing team? You know, what if we pick the wrong side in this battle? What's going to happen to us? Because, see, right down here, this is where they're trying to get to this desert area over here. It's not that far up there. They might come back and get us. So they said, you know, basically, if you'd already won the battle, we'd give them to you, but you hadn't even got those kings yet. How do we know you're going to get them? They still outnumber you 15,000 to 300. That's still pretty bad odds. So he says, all right, let me tell you something. He said, in verse 7, for this cause, when the Lord has delivered Zebah and Zalmunna into my hand, then I will tear your flesh with thorns of the wilderness and with briars. So he says, all right, you got that, but I'm going to tell you something. I'm coming back. And when I come back, it's not going to be pretty. This kind of reminds me of when my mother would say after she had already beaten me, when your dad gets home, it ain't going to be pretty. And he says, when I come back, it's not going to be pretty. And so he goes on, he leaves Succoth and travels on down toward the east, a little southeast, and he comes to Penuel. And he goes into Penuel and says, hey, look, my guys, we've been traveling, we've been chasing this army. We're starving. I've got to have some food for my army. Can you give us some bread? And they said the same thing the men in Succoth said. Have you got the 2 kings yet? If you had the 2 kings, we'd talk about this, but you know, you don't have them in your hand yet. And so the men of Penuel said the same thing the men of Succoth said. So he said, okay, see that tower over there? When I come back, I'm going to tear that tower down. And I'm going to come back in peace. Now, a little geography over here. There were 3 parts of 3 tribes on the east side. Reuben, Gad, and Manasseh. Manasseh had a big chunk up here, had a big chunk here too. So Manasseh, the 3 tribes that stayed on the other side. Do you remember what Moses made them promise when he left them there? You got to do what? Go with your brothers and fight. You can't stay here while your brothers go to war. So they left their children, their wives, their flocks, and they went on to battle. Well, now, these guys are saying, well, we're not sure. We're going to have to pick the right winner here. And, you know, what if you don't win? I mean, what if you don't win? What if the Midianites win? What's going to happen to us then? So they agreed to come on over, and here the men, the officials, the leaders of these 2 towns made the decision, we're not going to help you because we don't know if you're going to win or not. So now they come over, and guess what's going to happen? Well, if you've read ahead, you know what's going to happen. In verse 10, guess what happened to Zebah and Zalmunna? They get captured. Now, you don't have to be very smart to figure out what Gideon's going to do. What did they just ask him? He wouldn't give him any bread. They said, have you got them in your hand? You know, are you going to win this thing or not? We'd help if you're going to win, but we don't know. So now he comes down. It says they were down near Karkor, which is down trying to get back to the Moabites, trying to get back to where the Ishmaelites were from, trying to get back into the desert. They've made their way down there now. That's where the battle takes place. He captures them, and he brings them back up to Succoth and to Penuel. Verse 13 now. Succoth and Penuel are going to get, as we'd say, they're going to get what's coming to them. You made your bed. What's the rest of the expression? You got to sleep in it now. Well, they didn't make their bed, and they're going to sleep in it. It's not going to be very pleasant for them to sleep in. So he returns from them. One of the things that's interesting in this is it says, at most English versions translate at the ascent of the Heres. The King James Version says, at the rise or at the ascent of the sun. I'll be honest, in studying for this lesson, I've studied Judges before. I'd never come across that and thought about that before. But the more I think about it, the more it really fits into the story better if it is the ascent of the sun. Because number one, nobody can find Heres. There's nowhere anybody can find the ascent where you're going up Heres. They can't find the rising of Heres. There's no map, no geography can find that. So that's one reason I don't think that's probably a place. I think it's more talking about the ascent or the rising of the sun. Now another thing, when did Gideon take on the Midianites? Do you remember what time of day it was? If you'd heard my comedian that I'd heard a few years ago, Boudreaux, he said, at night. Did it at night. And it was at night. So he came in, and it makes sense that he would go in at night and be fighting. So he comes up before the sun comes up, and he finds a young man, a lad from the village of Succoth, and he says, here's what I want you to do. I want you to give me, let's write down the names of the important men of Succoth, because I got something for them. And he gets it written down, comes back in to Succoth, and he takes the elders of the city, some versions say the princes, some versions say the leaders, others say, and with thorns of the wilderness and briars, and with them he taught the men of Succoth. Well, that's not a very pretty picture. If you take it, there's any way you stretch it, it's not a very pretty picture. Can you imagine being beaten with, just think about a rose bush even. That wouldn't feel very good. But think about thorns that are even worse than that. Think about, if you remember the thorns that Christ had put into his head, they'd woven into a crown of thorns. They were not, this wasn't the first time they were ever weaponized. And so it looks like it's going to be pretty brutal. I tend to side on the side of, though it was a little worse than that. Because if you read ahead, when he got to the men of Penuel, he put them to death. He executed all of them, executed the men. Now, why would he execute one group and not execute the other? I was trying to figure this out, and finally I saw one commentator, and he said that the Hebrew word for thresh, like a threshing, like you would beat down wheat with to separate the wheat from the chaff with, a very heavy, big tool, and for teach are about the same thing. Well, I don't know if that's true or not, because I'm completely illiterate in Hebrew. But if it is true, it makes sense, because then he basically put them to death and pounded them with this threshing tool, with briars, and it was a very painful, punishing death to get everybody's attention. Look, when I come and ask you something with God on my side, you better do it. Now that's my opinion. You're certainly welcome. If you want to, in your mind, if you want to say, well, I just saw him beating them with the thorny briars, that's fine too. Bottom line was, it wasn't pleasant. We know when he got to Penuel, what he did was, there was a tower there, and he said, I'm going to tear down the tower, just like he said he was going to do, and then he executed the men that refused to give him bread when they were there. So Gideon this is the late Bronze Age It is a vicious age, and we've talked about it before. When they're engaged in battle, and as horrifying as it is to be in war, to have been in World War II, to be in Korea, to be in Vietnam, to be in Afghanistan or Iraq or any of those places. This was every soldier that was slain, just about, was slain up close and personal. There were some archers, and there were some that had about 6-foot-long spears. But for the most part, it was you'd go up and you'd grab somebody and you'd fight with them, and then you'd take that sword and go for the kill, right? Just like that. You saw them, you got blood on it. It was extremely fatiguing. And in that world, what he did was justified. Apparently, it was justified by God, or at least tolerated by God. Why? Do you find any condemnation by God or criticism by God of it? There's nothing there. So these men, Gideon was doing God's will, doing God's work, and now these men in the two cities tried to hold that up, and they came back and they got the punishment that was coming to them. Thoughts about that? Again, remember this, the late Bronze Age was still a very, very brutal, vicious time in history. It was war. I mean, war with a capital W. And it was fighting hand to hand. It was there wasn't a chance. Nobody ever had a gun. You didn't get to shoot anybody that was 500 yards over there. It was right up to them, kill them, and it was for most soldiers, that's all they ever did. So now he's dealt with those two. Now he's got some other things to deal with. He's got these two kings now he captured. Remember? Have you captured the kings? Yeah, I got the kings now. He came back to Succoth and Penuel, showed them that he had captured them with God's help, and now he comes back and he begins to question these two kings in verse 18. And he says to them, what kind of men was it that you killed at Tabor? You know, you guys have been in battle, and that's over on the other side of the Jordan River. He said, what kind of men did you kill in battle? It's also very close to the city of Ophrah. Guess who's from Ophrah? That's where Gideon's from. He said, well, these, and I don't, you'd like to know the underlying, what are they saying, what are they talking about? I don't know exactly why. I hadn't really got a exact reason, and I don't feel so bad because almost every commentator has a different spin on why this went like it did. But Gideon's in questioning to him, and he said, what kind of men were they you killed? And they answered, the New King James says, as you are, so were they. Each one resembled the son of a king. Well, now maybe he was thinking, I'm going to tell them they were all really brave men, they were strong men, they were good-looking men. I don't know. The Bible doesn't say any more than that. But then in verse 19, we find something about Gideon again. Gideon says, guess who they were? Guess who it was you killed at Tabor? My brothers. And then he goes further. He's not just talking about, hey, we're all brothers, right? No, he says, these were the sons of my mother. Now, as you know, we're going to see as we get into Gideon a little later, there were a lot of polygamy, concubines. There was a lot of relationships that brought children into the world. Here he says, these weren't just my father's son by some other woman, but these were my uterine brothers, if you will. We came out of the same womb. We got the same mother. And that seems to be a much stronger sometimes draw, because we're going to next week when Hugh gets into it, you're going to find out what a half brother would do to his brothers. But many times mothers of the same brothers of the same mother tend to be extremely close. And as you can think back, even if you go through, how about how the 12 tribes got here? Joseph and Benjamin, favorite wife, favorite sons. I don't think that's a coincidence. But anyway, so he said, well, those were my brothers, the sons of my mother. And if you'd not killed them, guess what I wouldn't have to do? I wouldn't have to kill you. But you did that, so guess what? You're going to die. And he makes it strong because as the Lord lives, I'm giving it to you basically a vow from God. If you'd not done that, before God I'm saying this, I'd have let you live. And then a really interesting thing comes up. And he brings his oldest son. Now, how old was he? I don't know. I've probably spent more time looking at it this week than you have. But I don't know how old he was. He was a youth, a young man, a boy. And he says to Jethro, rise and kill them. Now, he was old enough. What did he have? He carried a sword. He had a sword. But I don't know. Don't know. You would think it would, you would sort of think that. Of course, by this time, his family could have joined in what we don't really know, but could have been. But bottom line is, he's got his sword, and his daddy said, all right, that one and that one, kill them. Kill them. Why did Gideon do that? If he's a 12-year-old, a 13-year-old, a 10-year-old, 15-year-old, what was he trying to do? Was he trying to make him into a soldier, to make him stronger, to make him whatever, to set him up looking good in front of the other members of his 300 that were there and the other villages that were there? I don't know. I can't find an answer even between the lines there about why he wouldn't do it. But I do know one thing. He wouldn't do it. So, and then it's really interesting who responds next.
John, that's why I believe I don't think he was part of the battle.
Yeah.
He was a younger guy, between 10.
Yeah.
And because if he was part of that battle,
You'd think he'd have probably slain somebody.
he'd have known the feeling of killing a man that close to person.
But he comes in, and now this young man, and I'm kind of talking, I think in the 10 to 13, early teens at the latest, he comes in, he got his sword. Daddy gave me a sword, but there's a difference in having a sword experience. But I think here's kind of an analogy with you. The other morning, I was watching Andy Griffin, as I tend to do instead of having to watch the news, watch Andy Griffin, and Barney helped Opie get a slingshot. So Opie's got his slingshot, and he's out shooting, and he shot a couple, and he takes it, and some of y'all are smiling, y'all have seen this one too. You know what happens? He turns up and he goes, whap! A little bird goes, bloop, and plops down. It was a what? Well, I wasn't from Sand Mountain. I called it a slingshot. I'm sorry. I'll stand corrected now. He had a flip slingshot, so you know what I'm talking about, flip/slingshot. But he had it, and he, believe it or not, Andy does correct Barney on that. He gives him a little biblical correctness because Barney's talking about David. By the way, a little side rabbit trail here. And he said he didn't use that. He took a piece of leather with, two pieces of leather with a pouch in the middle and put it in, swung it around, got a little 3 or 4, let go one end of it, and that's how he got Goliath. And Barney's like, wow, I didn't know that. That's a cool story. I thought he did this with the flip. But anyway, he takes his flipping slingshot out there, and he hits the bird, and of course, it kills the bird. And Opie is, I don't know how old he is, 7 or 8 probably, maybe 9, but he's just devastated because he killed something, just a bird. But I kind of had a similar, when I was 10, it looked like a German Luger, but it was a BB gun. And I thought it was cool. When I got it one Christmas, we were at my aunt's in Nashville, and up on the hill, there's an old cemetery. And I was out, hope nobody dead can hear this, but I was shooting at the tombstones. That's a BB gun. It's not doing anything. It wasn't doing anything. And I was shooting sticks. Well, then I saw this bird over there, and it's a mockingbird. I didn't think I could hit it. Bing! Well, I did. And then my dad gives me a lesson that the mockingbird is a state bird in Tennessee, and it's against the law to shoot them. And, all of a sudden I could just see me, a 9, 10-year-old kid being drugged away to jail, But we understand that, don't we? We kind of relate to that. A lot of people have got stories about the first time they took their son or their daughter deer hunting. They kind of get buck fever. They just can't pull the trigger, because to think about killing a deer, I don't know what exactly happened with that, but bottom line is he could not get it done. The boy couldn't get it done. So Gideon does it, and he slays them, and he goes in, he takes off their camels, he takes the crescent-shaped ornaments, and we're going to find out later, he took their purple robes and all their gold and jewelry he had. So that gets us down to verse 22. And the people, as so often happens, what do we do with military leaders many times? What do we want them to do? We want to make them president. Now, remember Eisenhower? Some of y'all probably had to vote for Eisenhower if you wanted to, or voted against him, but you knew Eisenhower. John Kennedy, a war hero, comes out and gets to, Well, they want to make Gideon the king. Man, you've made this great victory. You won this great battle. You're a superstar on the army lore. Now, we want you to be our leader, too. He said, no, I'm not going to. And he said, my son's not going to. My grandson's not going to. Who's going to be your ruler? God. Good advice, wasn't it? Very good advice. And then he said, but I will ask you one favor. We slaughtered all these Ishmaelites, all these Midianites. And they had those gold earrings. He said, I wonder if all of you would give me one gold earring that you took as part of the spoil of this army. Give you an idea how big they were. I don't know how big the earrings were, but there were 1,700 shekels. That's somewhere between 45 and 50 pounds of gold. And they said, sure, if they threw it down there, laid a cloth down, threw them all, everybody came by and threw them in there. And he gets those. Now, I don't know what 50 pounds of gold would be worth today. I'd like to have 50 ounces of gold today. But think about 50 pounds of gold. Somebody knows what gold's worth. You take it, multiply 50 by 16 by whatever, $1,800, $1,900 an ounce, whatever it's worth today. 1.4 million. So all of a sudden, Gideon, remember what Gideon said back in the beginning? Remember what he said when he didn't want to go into battle? He said, look, my family's the worst, we're the least in the tribe. When I said, I'm the least in my family. Well, guess what's going to happen now? He's not going to be the least in his family anymore, because he's got that, and he's going on with that. And as we look through that, he's going to take these golden earrings, and all of a sudden now he's become a rich man. This is a rich man. I mean, he's he'd be a millionaire at those times. He was a wealthy, wealthy man. And now, in all fairness, we're not told how many wives he has, or concubines on the side, or whatever. But we know one thing: he had 70 sons. So he had more than a couple of wives. He had a few. So to take care of that, you got to have a pretty big income. So I guess he needed it for that reason. But he comes along and he does that, and then Gideon basically says, I'm going back home. Jerubbaal says, I'm going back home. And when he gets there, he goes back home. 40 years of peace. One problem, though, one last thing we'll close up on. He lives a long life, but he does one really, really bad thing here at the end. He comes in and he makes an ephod. He makes an ephod. The ephod was the outer vest, if you will, that the high priest wore. It had, if you read in Deuteronomy, all the details about it and how valuable it was. He takes some of this gold and perhaps some jewels, and he makes an ephod. And he brings it back to his hometown. Guess what the people began to do? They began to use that as in worship. And all of a sudden, you've got bringing in idol worship. Still want to worship Jehovah too and be good to both. I mean, I want to be like God. I like God. God's okay, but, so is Baal and the other things. So he does that, and it says it becomes a snare or becomes a trap. It became trouble for Gideon. And guess what happens after Gideon dies? Well, he's buried. This is supposedly a late Bronze Age tomb, what it would have looked like. He goes back, they buried him in his father's tomb, and things are pretty good. But guess what happens? The last thing for you to think about, what do you think is going to happen again? Right back around to the Baals. Gideon dies. Okay, we saw a bunch of good stuff with Gideon, but ooh, look at that rock over there. Ooh, that must be Baal. Look, there's an Ashtaroth. There's a Lady Baal over there. Let's bow down to them. And so you begin to see a lot of troubling issues going on with them. And that's kind of where it ends up. Remember, as you look ahead to next week, we were introduced to one of the sons by name, or two of the sons by name, of Jerubbaal, of Gideon. We're introduced to Abimelech, and he's going to be the next judge. And Brother Hugh will have that for you next week. Thoughts, comments, interesting stories. Interesting stories, a lot to learn from them. A lot of things still work today that worked back then. There's nothing else, you're dismissed. Parents, don't forget, go to the teen room. You got parents of the youth group, you got a meeting down there about the egg hunt. Thanks for being here. Bum, ba-dum, bum, bum, bum.